Hey, party people! Today we're here to talk about succession, or how an ecosystem can recover from a disaster. Basically, an ecosystem goes through a life cycle from its very beginnings to the end, which is called a climax community. When I say the end, I don't mean like the death of an ecosystem, I mean its final, most powerful form is what we call its climax community. Ecological succession is officially how an ecosystem changes over time, especially after a disturbance. As new species move in, the populations change, and some species die out. There are two types of ecological succession, or two different ways an ecosystem can develop. The first one, all the way on the left, is primary succession. This happens only on newly exposed rocky surfaces after maybe a glacier melts or a volcano erupts. On that rocky surface, pioneer species settle in and an ecosystem is built from scratch. So if we look at that diagram below the word, you can see flat, barren, rocky surfaces, and some lichens are going to develop from there, and it's going to take us a long heckin' time to get to our final climax community. How long, you ask? Well, this diagram says it's going to take at least 115 years for the ecosystem to develop all the way into that forest climax community. Now let's look on the right side of the screen to secondary succession. This is also the story of how an ecosystem develops into its climax community. However, this happens after just a disturbance that harmed the ecosystem and left some of it intact. Think about a forest fire. Look down at the diagram, and all the way on the left, you can see land a few weeks after a forest fire. Yes, most of the ecosystem is totally gone, but you can tell that there's still soil for plants to take root in, and there were even some seeds in that soil that are already sprouting. So this ecosystem is going to go through different stages of development that feature different species and end in a climax community, but it's only going to take like 40 years. Secondary succession is way shorter than primary succession. What they both have in common is they feature different stages that can be dominated by different species. In some stages, shrubs might be the thing. In some stages, taller trees might be the thing. Some species will die out and some will develop over the course of succession until we get to the ecosystem in its final form. While we're talking about recovering from disaster, I want to talk to you about this weird connection between biodiversity and succession. So this diagram is modeling for us something that's called the bottleneck effect. Imagine the bottle on the left, all the way on the left, represents an ecosystem before a disaster. It has high biodiversity, and that's represented by the different color beads in the jar. Those are different species in an ecosystem. What happens is a natural disaster that wipes out members of the species at random and leaves just a few individuals that survive. With the bottles, this is represented by just a few being poured out and kept in the jar of the surviving population. These survivors are chosen at random. They're no better or worse than any other members of the ecosystem. They just happen to survive by luck alone. What happens is those individuals will be used to repopulate the area and help to recover the ecosystem. In the bottles, that's represented by the final bottle, where you can see that it is full of beads once again, aka the ecosystem is full of different species and individuals. Now, here's what happened. Because of the random selection of the disaster, the original population looks different from the new population. That doesn't mean that the red beads were well adapted to survive. It just means that more of that kind of individual just got lucky and then was used to repopulate the area. So what I'm trying to get through to you is the higher biodiversity an area has, the better it's equipped to survive a bottleneck event. If you have a forest with a ton of different species of trees with high species diversity, that means even if there's a forest fire and some random trees survive, chances are you'll have enough different varieties to successfully repopulate and have a new biodiverse forest. What if initially you're in a forest that already has kind of medium to low biodiversity and you go through a bottleneck event like a forest fire? Well, it's possible that only a single species of tree will survive and be used to repopulate the area. This is dangerous because, remember that banana story that I told you? If only one species of tree survives and repopulates, what if there's a disease that targets that species? It would be a low biodiversity situation, and that forest would not be very resilient to changes in the ecosystem. So I hope you see the connections between high biodiversity, resiliency, and success in succession. Please, of course, come to office hours if I can help you out with anything. I'll be there.